So good morning, everybody. It's really nice to see you. So today we're going to have a little look at Shibori, which is a Japanese technique of stitching and dyeing. I've got a little bit of a PowerPoint, but I thought what I'd do is get you started on that first, and then we can have a little look at that just to see some ideas. And also I found this really lovely little video of some Japanese women doing some shibori in a little workroom. So I thought that would be quite nice to have a little look at. So in your packs, you should have some fabric, which is quite a fine fabric. This is a cotton lawn. So it's the stuff that Liberty fabrics can be made from. And it's quite a fine one. So you can kind of, it's a bit sort of almost translucent, so you can see through it. And I get this from Whaley's of Bradford, if anybody wants to get hold of it. I'm sure you can get it in other places, but I tend to buy in bulk. So yeah, there's that. In your pack, you should also have some thread. So this is a Coats Turco satin thread that I've sent to you, which I've done purposefully in a different colour from the thread so that you can see it, because all the stitching you're about to do is going to have to be taken out again, okay? So it's easier to be able to see it. So if you're going to do any more, always use a contrast colour of thread so that you can see what's happening. So what I've done is I've done some examples of it, and we were talking about doing stuff with turmeric, and you can use tea, you can use coffee, you can use beetroot vinegar, and other household availabilities. It's actually quite interesting, done with food colouring, if you happen to have some left over from a icing the cake moment or whatever. I just really wanted to use things that you could easily get your hands on. Traditionally though, it's done with indigo, so you'll see a lot of blue and white stuff coming out of the Shibori stable, if you like. But increasingly it's being done with lots and lots of different colours. So it's quite an interesting kind of concept. So I'm going to just go on to my little camera. There we go. And show you a little piece that I've done. So this is turmeric. And can you see I've got little bits of sort of splattery stuff going on. I don't know if you can see it closely enough. You can see a bit of a design. So what happened here, just to show that sometimes it's good to experiment, is I dyed it originally in beetroot vinegar, and then I thought, oh, this looks a bit pale, not sure about this. I'll over dye it with turmeric. And can you see where the little veins are? That's the beetroot that got left over on the stitching lines. So don't feel like you've got to just dye it in one colour. There's got a lot of potential to do all sorts of other things as well. So can you see the pattern okay? Yeah. So that's one. I then did some with tea, and I kind of had a bit of a magical mystery tour with this one. So I'm just going to lay this one down. And I tried different shapes. Now, on your handout that I sent out with the pack, there's a little petal shape on it, which I have used for part of this design. So can you see here, I've just drawn on my petal shape, and then I'll show you how I'm going to do the stitching in a minute. And so where you stitch, basically, you create what's called a resist. So just like it would be if you were doing batik, yeah, or using gutta in silk painting, you're putting something there that's, when it's drawn up and gathered up, it stops the dye getting to that area. So I've done that one. I've also done with the petal shape, I did some into the middle here and gathered those up, and then you can create a bit more of a flower shape there. This one I did as a fold, so I folded over part of my thread, sort of my fabric, like that. And what I did was I stitched along through both of the layers, and then I took a little detour to make this circle, and then stitch back again. So you can create then a design on both sides of the fabric by just folding it in half. This one, I just literally went round and round and round, stitching it in a spiral and pulled it up. So I created these circles. Can you see that okay? Yeah. And a bigger circle. Yeah. And then I had a little bit of a play, just gathering up stitches. So I did 4 rows of gathered stitches and created that piece there. So they're quite effective. This is a stitched variety of Shibori. So you're going to say to me, so what's the difference between that and the 70s tie-dye? So those of you that have done tie-dye before, that's usually done with wrapping round and tying certain areas. It's not done traditionally with stitching. So that's one of the main differences. The other main difference is tie-dye tended to be multicoloured, whereas Shibori tends to be done in one colour traditionally. That's not so you have to do that, but that's one of the things. This one I've done, I don't know if you can see that, there we go. Again, I use the same little pattern petal as I did for the turmeric one that I've shown you. But one thing occurred, which just again shows perhaps it's not the end of the world. One of my threads came out when I was tying it, and I think it's this little area here. So this bit here. But I decided just to go for it, and I dyed it anyway. And you know what? It's okay. It's not the end of the world. So I've got 2 rows of stitching, and then this bit here is left not stitched. And so that picks up the dye, and the bit where you stitched it doesn't pick up the dye as much. So if we look at all of this as a technique, this was done when people who didn't have as much cash wanted to embellish their fabric in order to make it feel like they've got extra special fabric. This is done not out of being able to print anything, it's just being done out of being able to use your hand stitching and have some dye locally that you can use. And I think that's the context in which we should approach perhaps this for this morning. This is very much about, what this is all we've got. We're all sitting in our various homes, and that is actually all we've got right now, in terms of our materials, and our dyes. So we're kind of following along exactly what happened when these were invented. Now, this goes back as originally as a Chinese design back to the 8th century. So it's been there for a long time. And they used stitching, but they also used a paste. That was the other way that they resisted it. So they put on a paste onto the fabric. So there are other ways of doing this, and we'll have a look at that in a bit. So what I think would be really nice is if you have done some drawing already of your design, perhaps if you could hold that up, that would be really good. If you haven't, it's not a problem. Ookie poke. Yep. Brilliant. That's great. Okay, so what I've done then is I've set up some little ideas here for you. So I am going to suggest to you that we're going to use 2 different methods so that you get an effect with both of them. Just trying to find. Right, so on this one, what I've done, and I'm suggesting you do for yours, is I put an extra little leaf shape in the middle here. And what I've done is I've actually done little running stitches here. And if you're going to do internal running stitches, they need to be, in old money, about 1/8 of an inch apart. Then if you're going to do running stitches on the outer piece, then that needs to be done at about 1/4 of an inch. Yeah. So smaller in the middle to get a nice effect, slightly larger around the outside. And the way that I've done this is I've come down here, down to there, and then I've gone like that, okay? Rather than cutting across. I don't think it particularly matters, but they all seem to suggest that you do it that way rather than crossing over your stitches. So that's one method where you do it in the flat. Now I've left, can you see these tails here?
Yeah.
So I've stitched the centre separately from the outer. So I've got little tails in each of my centre pieces. And I'm going to suggest to you that you do the same, because then that makes it easier. And then I've, on my outer piece, I've done it in one length, and I've got knots at one end that I've really secured this time, having just told you that one of mine came out on the other one. And then they finish up here, and I've left the ends here. Now, it's really important when we start to gather these up that you don't cut those long tails off, because they are the easy way into you being able to clip the knot in order to release the fabric once you've dyed it. Does that all make sense? So don't get rid of these long tails, keep them there. It just makes life seriously easier. Are there any questions about that?
Yes. Should the pattern pieces be touching each other?
They can be whatever you want them to be.
Right. So when you sew round them, you just kind of skip underneath, do you, to the next one?
No, you'd finish off. So these are apart, yeah?
Yeah.
So I would do the internal,
Mm.
and then I'd do the external.
Right.
And
Okay.
leave those with their tails. So
Yeah.
do them individually.
Yeah. Thank you.
You'll get a better finish to it, because really what you'll be doing then, just to explain that, you'll be isolating that shape. If you put your stitch underneath, you're pulling those shapes together and creating a resist there.
Yeah.
So you don't want to do
Makes
that.
sense.
So they stay as standalones. Yeah.
Thank you.
I've also done this one, so just to show you on here. So I've taken the motif and I've done my stitching, and then I've put a running stitch through the middle. I'm going to just see what that does. Yeah, again, just with one long bit of the thread. So the other thing that's probably worth saying about with the thread is that it's a good idea to use a thread that's got some nylon in it. And the reason you want to do that is so that it doesn't take up too much dye. Okay, so the thread that you've got has got nylon in it and some cotton, so that you're not allowing that the dye to pick up the cotton, too much of the dye in your thread, so that you maintain this idea that you're going to have some paler areas where your stitching is. So the other option, if you don't want to do, or another option, if you don't want to do the flat piece, you can, if you want to, take your, I'm just going to show you on here, take your shapes that you've drawn on. I'm just going to put a knot in the end, and you can fold your fabric up onto the line, and then you can do a set of running stitches round the rim, if you like, of your shape. So if I just pull that through there, can you see? There's a little rim, so it creates a little pocket like that. Yeah. Can you see that reasonably okay? So that's another way of doing this design. So I would encourage you to just have a little play with these, do some in different ways and some in the same way. And then there's also another way to do this, and that is, you just see on there, I've started to do that, and then that will be it for doing this sort of system, is I've started on the side here and I've got a knot, and then what I've done is I've taken a little stitch, can you see, from that rim, and I've brought my thread over and taken a little stitch from that rim, and then when I pull it up, can you see it? It pulls it up tightly, so that you've got a little ridge on the back of your work. So it's pulling those together, and that's another traditional method of stitching the fabric together. Does that make, yeah? That makes sense. So basically what we need to do this morning then is to kind of fill up your piece of fabric. Now, the other thing I probably haven't said about this is I've washed this fabric before I used it, before I've sent it to you. And it's really important to wash it, because with the best will in the world, some of your fabric is going to have some sort of finishing on it. And what you want to do is you want to remove that. I just wash it in a hot wash in the washing machine. Some people use soda ash and all sorts to scour it. For this purpose, I don't think it's necessary. I use a non-biological washing powder, and as you can see, it's taken the dye absolutely fine. Yeah, so there's no debate about it. Yeah. So, do you want to just tell me if there are any questions or comments whilst you get going? And Kathy, you're just on mute. Do you want to just unmute? Yeah, that'd be great. That's it.
Okay.
Right. Good morning.
Hello. When we start stitching, do we put a knot in the end or not?
I do, but make sure it's a very, very good knot.
Okay.
So that it doesn't pull out, because that's just the annoying part about it. Yeah, if it pulls out, you've done all that work. So
Okay.
if I just show you on here, hefty knot.
Yeah, right.
On the end. And then that gives you something to draw up against as well.
Yeah.
So once you've got all your stitching in place, what we'll do is then pull up, the fabric.
Right.
Yeah, and then that will get pulled up. So you'll end up with little bunches of fabric.
Yeah.
You'll see here, I'm just pulling it up. And that's the advantage of using a thread that's got some nylon in it and that is strong. This won't work very easily with polyester thread that you do for, machining. You need something that's sort of like an upholstery weight or a leather weight, of thread. So something's a strong thread. And then you can see it's all bunched up underneath there.
Yeah.
So yeah. So what you're aiming for there then is for that to be really tight, and then I just put a really big set of knots into those threads there to hold that in place.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's holding fine with my knot. So yeah, but just make sure you're really, really vigilant about your knot making. Yeah. Not that I'm paranoid or anything. It's so disappointing when it comes out and and all of that.
Right.
Was there another question?
Yes. Is the thread per shape, or does the thread go from one shape to the next shape to the next shape?
Right. That's entirely up to your design. So if I'll just go back to this one here, Jane. So this one, I've put my designs up together, but I stitched the middles with an individual piece of thread. This one, I've gone from one to the other.
Thank you. Yeah.
Yeah. So if you're doing them individually, I'd do it as individual threads, because what you don't, and if it's connecting up, so if you imagine on this one here, it was connecting up, you can see that where it's been bunched together, you've got a resist happening in the middle, so you get a continuous white area or paler area. If you don't want that, then you need to stitch the motifs individually.
Right.
So this is all part of the, your design really. And we're using a petal shape because it's quite nice to stitch, but like I've said, you can, if you want to, experiment with some of the other ideas, which are to do round and round in a circle. Yeah, so you get a spiral. So start with a knot in the middle and just little stitches coming out, and then pull that really nice and tightly, and that creates these sort of almost chrysanthemum-like flowers, which I think is quite nice to do. So it's like tie-dye, but you're doing it through stitching to create the shape. And I think it's more exciting than that, because you get these lovely little petal areas, which you wouldn't get with tie-dye. Tie-dye is something that came out of Japan, when Dylon worked out that they could cellus dyes, which then moves me on to what I was saying about we're using dyes that you might just have at home, but you equally can dye with, you know, the conventional dyes. So Procyon dyes, which is what Dylon is made from, cold water dyes, you can use those. They're still kind of available out there. Some of the bigger Wilko short stores still seem to have them, and it's just, they're all in one place now. I don't think you've got to add anything to them. I think they're a contained unit now. You used to have to add all sorts of other bits and pieces. If you want to do more of this with Procyon dyes, then there is a company up in Manchester that sells them, called Fred Aldous. So you can get cold water dyes from them. So Procyon dyes are used for cotton and silk. They don't do wool. If you want to do wool, it needs to be done with an acid dye.
So is it the smaller the stitch, the better it'd be?
The smaller the stitch, the better it is if it's in the middle of something.
Oh, I see.
Yeah. So the bigger the stitch, yes, you'll have a more obvious design coming through.
Right.
Sometimes if you've got it too big, so I wouldn't go more than about 1/4 inch length, because if you go too big, it doesn't sit as well. So you get more leakage, if you like, into, or seepage into the area with the dye. So work on about 1/4 inch running stitch for this, and that would be good.
I'm cutting lengths, the right length for stitching.
Yes.
But I've got a little bit left from my last length, but it won't go all the way around. I take it it's better not to use that. Or can you rejoin a thread in the middle?
You could rejoin, as long as you've, you know, well, no, you can't really, because you've got to be able to pull them up.
Yes, that's what I was thinking.
I have done, if that's the case, I have used, and it's been okay, stranded thread, but two stranded threads together, and that seems to pull up quite nicely. The advantage of using this cotton lawn is it's quite fine, so it's quite easy to pull up. You could, if you wanted to, use some thicker cotton, but you won't get, it'll be a more crude design, because it bunches up more, you know, tight. It doesn't bunch up as tightly as this will. But again, it's a really nice one to experiment with. And of course, silk is a nice one to experiment with as well. So a habitai silk, even weave, probably at a weight of about 7 is good, 7 or 8. So it's not very, very fine, and then that would work quite well. You can also, like I said, you could use food colorings and stuff as well. If you've got some left over, you could either be very bright, vibrant, or you could dilute them down. And then there's lots and lots of things, perhaps not quite the time of year, but, you know, if you had things coming from the garden, you know, so blackberries and raspberries and black currants, they're all different dyes that you could use to create this effect. If you think about it, anything that you use that gives you a need to use vanish is a good dye. Yeah. So just go think about it from that point of view. Yeah. And I think that will be quite good. This one that I did in the tea, this was PG tips, and it seems to, you know, got a nice high tannin quality to it. I was saying the other day, if you go down the Earl Grey route, Lapsang Souchong route, not that I drink these things, but I buy them specifically for dyeing with an E, then they give a very much more delicate colour. And they are colour fast because they are what's called a substantive dye, so they don't need anything to fix them. If you are wanting to use the fruit teas, again, they're very, very delicate and very pretty. They aren't colour fast. Now, there are ways of making that happen. You can either use what's called a mordant, which is a catalyst that allows the fabric to hold the dye onto it because that particular mordant is there. Aluminium is one of them. So if you did perchance still have aluminium saucepans somewhere or access to some, then you could actually boil your fabric in an aluminium saucepan, and that would put mordant onto your fabric to make it colour fast. So yeah, that's one method of doing it.
Probably a daft question, but does it matter whether it's decaf or ordinary tea?
Oh.
Does
I'm
the
gonna-
caffeine make a difference?
No,
I don't think it does.
I think the tannins are still there.
Right.
I'm going to confess to just being a caffeine person, so I've never tested it with decaf, but I can't see any reason why it wouldn't. Yeah,
Just a thought, really.
it's a good idea actually. I've done it. Having said that, I have done it with decaf coffee, filter coffee.
Yeah.
And it does work on that okay, and you get a very much more browny, bluey colour with that.
What with it
Having
being
played about with
Being
many
coffee rather than.
Yeah.
Say again, sorry.
having played about with many different sorts of dyes from
Yeah.
all sorts, you can end up with a vast array of beige. So don't be disappointed, ladies. Beige becomes a very much loved colour. And we all need an avocado. I'm surprised you not mentioned avocados, Philippa.
I didn't dare, Anne.
Oh, right. Collect your avocado stones.
Really?
Yep.
Huh?
So
Sorry.
I did. No, you're fine. I did avocado stones, and I got some really lovely pink colours from it.
Nice.
Other folk did avocado and got beige. Hence the.
No, I've always managed pink. It's when you start with avocado. It's when you go around the garden, you look for, oh, let's try some bay leaves.
Yes. Yeah.
Let's try some, all these beige.
Yeah. But certainly, if you go for summer fruits, elderberry is lovely. That's a really nice one. But they all work. If you go onto the John James website, who is the needles person that I buy from, they have got a really nice chart on their website which tells you everything you'd ever want to know about needles. And how they're used and why they're used and what the sizes are, and it's just really, really informative. Yeah, so if you get a minute, and you can download it and you can print it, which is really, really good. So I'd suggest that. We don't well, I don't think I was ever really taught much about needles when I was growing up. It was more just whatever was left in the sewing box, to be honest with you.
Yeah.
If you want to know everything there is ever to know about needles and threads and whatever, this woman is Dawn Cameron Dick, her name is, and she has written this book. It's for patchwork and quilting, but it doesn't actually matter as such. Because what she does is she talks you through everything you'd ever want to know about sewing machine needles. And she did a really nice, I don't know if it's still on the Beyond the Festival of Quilts, but she did a really interesting class on it that you could just sign, you don't have to pay for it, you just attend. But can you see on here, there's a picture for each of the different types of
Yes.
and why you would use them and how you would use them. And what the colour codes mean on the top of each of the needles, which is really good. There's a whole bunch of stuff as well on threads. So one of the interesting things I found was, when you buy some thread, it's either twisted round in a spiral, isn't it, as it's wound onto the bobbin, or it is just twisted round kind of on top of itself. So you just see horizontal lines going up it. Well, if you have horizontal lines, then you need to put that up on the top of your machine, not on the feeder that's normal for it. If it's got a spiral load to it, then that needs to go onto your machine on its side, and then that stops it breaking.
Ah,
There we are. Oh, that's pretty. Wow.
That's good. So this little design is the one that I've used on my turmeric one that I showed you, and the grey one. And you can go onto the website that's online fabric store, and you can download that for free if you would like to. I think it's just really cheerful, isn't it? And you can see that lovely shape. So that's one to have a little look at. And then I found this lovely picture of a woman sitting and doing shibori, which I just think is totally charming. And this is the history. So there's the indigo that I was talking about. So originated in China, and then became quite popular in Japan in the 17th and 19th, or 17th to 19th centuries. And that's what I was saying about people with lower social classes needed an alternative to silk because they were banned from using it and wearing it. So this is how they fought back. So the earliest textiles in shibori date back to the 8th century. And they did shibori dyeing of all sorts of different fabrics. And then they kind of developed the techniques so that apart from stitching, they then got into doing the paste resist as well. And they used rice paste to make it. So then they would put it on like almost like glue. And here's another example of the stitch technique. So you can see these lovely waves of colour. So where the stitching is, stops the dye getting through, and then where that was puffed out because you'd stitched round that shape, that creates the darker colours on it. And this is the little video, I'm just hoping it's going to work, of women sitting and doing some shibori. So I'm just going to try and play that and see if that will. What I'm going to do now is I'm just going to start tightening up this row that I've done here. So I'm going to pull the centre pieces to start with because they're the easiest for me to see. And can you see then on the back it creates these little bubbles?
Yeah.
So you go round once with your thread and then go round again, and what that does is it gives you a bit of friction so that you can really pull it nice and tightly, and then do the same with the second knot. So go round once and then round twice.
Hey, I've lost Philip.
You know, normally, oh, okay, right. So this one then, I'm going to leave these tails so that I can find those tails once I've dyed it, and then I can cut through that knot. So don't cut these tails off, leave them on. And then I'm going to go to my next inner piece. I'm going to do the same there. So pull it up nice and tightly. And you have got a choice at this stage whether you have the little poppy bits coming down or
Philippa, I think we might have lost your sound again.
how's that? Is that better?
Yeah, there we go.
Okay. It had muted itself again. I don't know why. Right, so I'm just going back into the pulling up the middle ones to start with because I can see those. If I'd pulled up the outer ones, then I wouldn't be able to find the middle ones as easily. So I'm just doing that. So I've done all my centre pullings up here, and then you can always just go to the back of your work so that you create these little, yeah, puffed areas. Yeah. So you can always just give them an extra tweak just to make sure that they're all through. And then I'll pull up the main outside ones. So I'm just going to keep pulling those until it's nice and tight. And then I'm going to do my knots with that. Okay, so you can really, so you end up with a sort of a bunch little mess of knots and strings. Okay, so I've pulled up that area now, and I've got left with here all these strings. Okay, so don't worry about those. You want to keep those available to you because it makes it a lot easier when you're going to do the cutting. So what I'm going to do next then is I'm going to, this feels like the generation game now. Right, so here's my bowl of water. So in order for dyes to work, what you need to do is be able to wet your fabric, okay? So I'm just going to put it into this is just ordinary water. And if you want to, you could leave it for a little while, but you know, this is quite fine cotton, so it's going to be okay. It'll take the water up quite quickly. And then I'm going to just squeeze that out in my hand. And then I've got my turmeric, which I've made, okay? And what I'm going to do is I'm going to dip my fabric into the turmeric and give it a bit of a swirl, yeah? And with this, I found that if I leave it for a good 10 minutes, it's absolutely fine with turmeric. And then you can take it out and rinse it off. Tea is equally the same if you're using things like PG tips and, you know, high tannin teas. If you're using something that's a little bit more subtle, then I'd leave it a little bit longer, okay? And if you're using dyes, because you've got some at home, then follow the manufacturer's instructions. So sometimes with the dyes, they say to leave them in for 45 minutes to an hour, just to take in the dye properly. Now, if you think about it, what they're trying to do is they're trying to get you to dye it without leaving any white on it, you know, or any of the original colour. So I would experiment with that, and I've found half an hour actually is enough with the commercial dyes to leave it in. Okay, but other than that, how you make up the dye, follow the manufacturer's instructions. Are there any questions on that? Anything? No? Okay, so I'll just leave that in there for a short time. And then if you want to, you can do the same thing now if you want to, or if you want to wait till this is over, then that's absolutely fine. And you can just leave them then sitting and doing their thing and carrying on. So I'm just going to come back hopefully into my main. Go. Hello. Right. That's gone to mute again, has it? No, it's all right, isn't it? Is that okay, Emily? Is that working all right? Oh, good. So that's the basic stitched shibori technique. And what I just would like to do is just encourage you, if you've enjoyed it, do some more. You know, it's quite a therapeutic thing to do, and sitting and stitching is really, you know, very, very nice. And just explore what the patterns, you know, could be, with a view that you could, you know, get yourself perhaps a beginnings of a scarf or something, you know, that would be really nice to do. Think about using bits of plastic, think about using other things that, like, you know, chickpeas or kidney beans, you know, all the dried versions, not the soft ones obviously. Marbles, you know, the little ceramic weights you can put in for pastry, they work quite nicely as well. So yeah, just have an explore with it and see what patterns you can create. You can always draw them onto fabric as well, so don't worry about that. So you've always got a guide to follow.